Good morning, everybody. We're going to be starting in just a moment here, and I just want to remind everyone that we ask that you mute your mic as you come in and keep video off as well, just for the sake of bandwidth. We want to welcome you to another one of our Gardening on the Gulf Coast programs today. Mr. Paul Winski, who is horticulture agent in Harris County, is going to be our presenter on cool season annual color. Paul has worked with Extension now for a number of years, and prior to that, worked in the industry, and so he's very familiar with many of the ornamental plants, cool season color plants, and others that are sold commonly in the industry, how to utilize them, and I think you'll really enjoy this presentation today. So, Paul, I think we're hitting right at 10 o'clock. So, if you want to start up, that's good. Or if you'd like to wait a few more minutes, I'll leave that up to you.
All right, Skip. Well, thank you for that intro. We will go ahead and jump into this. Just so you know, this program is being recorded. So you will receive a link to this recording on our YouTube site. You will also receive a survey. We do appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions. It's a short survey, but it helps us to better develop these programs going forward. Up on the screen, you can see, so I am in Harris County. We're going to be covering Cool Season Color Annual. Next week, Mr. Boone Holiday in Fort Bend County will be covering Winter Bulb Care and Division. And then on the 16th, Stephen Brugerhoff from Brazoria County will be covering horticulture myths, and I believe he added mystics too. So that one ought to be pretty interesting. So if you haven't registered for the other two talks for the month, please do. We do appreciate your time, and we do appreciate your support. So without any further ado, let's get started. So as I said, we are going to cover cool season color annuals, and it's great living in this area because you can pretty much garden year round. Whether you're into vegetables or colors or annuals or shrubs and things, you can there's something that can keep you busy in the garden in the Gulf Coast area, which is really great. I know we had our first frost yesterday, and we've got some rains today, but that's expected this time of year, and we definitely do need the rain. So, with that being said, just a brief overview. Annuals, what are they? In case you're not familiar, they live only one growing season, so their role is to germinate, grow, put on a canopy, put on leaves, put on a bulk of that plant, and then it needs to flower, produce seed, and then it dies off. So it's a one growing season type plant. Now down here, the plants don't always read these definitions, and so in this area, some annuals can grow much longer, and some will almost start to perennialize depending on how cold we get. But this is the classic example of what an annual is. The other great thing about them is they are very versatile. They're sturdy plants, and they are inexpensive. So depending on whether you've got a large area to cover, you're able to, buy them in 1801 trays, which means there's 18 plants to a tray. There's some that are you can buy in 24s, or if you want something that's larger and ready to go, you can get them in 3-inch, 4-inch pots, 6-inch pots, gallon pots. So depending on how quickly you want that color impact, you can buy them in larger sizes. So under benefits, we talk about that instant color, that instant gratification, and that's what annuals lend themselves to. I sort of like to call them the bling of the garden because it can put that pop of color or that vastness of color, depending on how large your beds are. That you can get some really intense, really good color combinations quickly. They will bloom most of the season. The other thing I like about them is you can really experiment with them, not only in the landscape, but in containers. And I think that's one of the pluses of working with annual color. We talk about the thriller plant, the filler plant, and the spiller plant, and so you can go with flowering, you can go with height, you can go with plants that don't flower but have unique foliage, and so annuals lend themselves to that. The other good thing is, say you moved in to a new house or you did some renovation and your plants aren't quite up to speed yet, you need a couple seasons before they start to fill out. Annuals will help fill in those spaces to make it to tie things together and make it look like it's been around for a while and just make it more visually pleasing to the eye. It allows you to extend your perennial beds. So as perennials come in, you can have your annuals blooming. So they work very well together. And then, as I mentioned earlier, planters, hanging baskets, window boxes, there's a lot of diversity and a lot of options when you're working with annuals. Site selection. Again, when we're growing in the cool season, we still have to consider light, soil, moisture, and drainage. And these are going to be a little bit different this time of year because, first of all, our day length is shorter. Okay, so the sun's not as high on the horizon as it is in the summer. So we have to adjust for that. Some areas, if you had deciduous trees, may be getting more light now, which is probably fine because the light intensity isn't as strong. You still want to prepare that soil the way you would in the spring, but just be aware that that soil isn't going to dry out as quickly now because of the shortened day length, the cooler temperatures. If you had drainage problems, you may see your drainage problems even more of an issue this time of year because the soil isn't drying out as quickly. So as we mentioned with regard to earth kind practices, when you're developing your beds, work in at least 2 to 3 inches of compost. Or if you have some drainage issues, work in some expanded shale in order to help with that. So there's you want to do the same steps, but just be aware that your day length, everything comes in, it's a little bit different. So that soil, that moisture, things aren't going to dry out as quickly. And you still want to do the proper preparation in order to have the color that you want and for those plants to thrive. Mulching is still important. We're in the cool season, there's winter weeds out there, so we want to keep them at bay. We want to keep that soil surface nice and soft. We don't want it to crust. We want to minimize the amount of evaporation, which will happen because we can have some dry winters also. It adds humus, and humus is that area. If we have a 3-inch layer of mulch, and that humus layer is where that lower layer of mulch interacts or interfaces with the soil. That's where those microbes start to break down the mulch and it starts to develop that humus. And that humus is great for the overall soil profile because over time it's going to improve it. And especially with our clay soils, at least where I am here in Harris County, we need all the help we can get in order to help improve those. To improve that soil. So the ideal quantity, we want to put down at least a 3-inch layer of mulch. Again, we don't want to mound it up right up against the plant. We want to back it away because we don't want any extra moisture to build up along the base of that plant where we can end up with some disease issues. Deadheading, and this is not, listening to the Grateful Dead out in the garden as you're working, but hey, if you enjoy that, go for it. This is actually what we want to do is we want to remove the older flowers or the spent flowers or the dried up flowers because we don't want them to go into seed. We want to because we want to keep that plant blooming. So if we stop the energy going into seed production, it will continue to bloom and we'll have more flowers throughout the season. Some of the plants that will need this are marigolds, any of the daisy type flowers, verbena, and also dianthus. So anything that if it looks nasty, if it doesn't look good after it's bloomed, go ahead and spend some time and clean it up, because the plant's going to is going to like it, because it will continue to bloom, and you're will enjoy that color for a longer period of time. And then fertilization. So we still want to put some fertilizer out, but just be aware, as I mentioned, with our growing conditions at this time of year, time release fertilizer is always going to be triggered by temperature and moisture. As our soil temperatures get a little bit cooler, our air temperatures get cooler, it may not release as quickly as it would, say, during the summer. And also for our organic based ones, they won't break down as quickly, because the microbes, certain microbes aren't as active when those temperatures get a little bit cooler. So one thing you may want to consider is if you get it in, you get your plants in, and maybe 3 weeks later or so, you see that they're doing okay, but they're not putting a lot of new growth on. A shot of a liquid fertilizer will help just to get them started, and then it'll allow that time release or the organic base to start to break down. So the two of them will work pretty well hand in hand. All right, so let's get into the plants. Let's start talking about some of these plants that we can use for our cool season gardens. So the first one is Sweet Alyssum, Lobularia marittima. And as you can see in the image here, it works extremely well as a ground cover. You can see very low growing, probably tops out about anywhere from 6 to 10 inches. I would say it's probably more 8 to 10 inches. And this is a plant that's going to get a little bit wider than it will taller. But you can see it just looks, we've got a nice drift of lavender here, and we've got a nice drift of white in the foreground. These plants will do extremely well in the sun or even part shade. They've got a nice mounded habit, and they've got a nice fragrance. So you always want to look, what's that other value added attribute that you can bring to the garden with some of these cool season plants. And Alyssum has a great fragrance. The other thing is it's got a great pollen source for beneficial insects. So if we can bring those beneficial insects into that landscape and keep them there with that pollen source, that's an added plus. They'll be there to knock out any pests that you might have, and then that pollen will keep them happy to stick around. So as you can see, a great edging plant in the front of the border or in drifts of color as it's being used here. Cyclamen. I was in the garden centers the other week, and there's a lot of cyclamen out there, and it's really great. I grew up in the Northeast, and cyclamen, was more of a gift plant. This was not a cool season plant. It was maybe an early spring plant for us, but it wasn't a plant that we could use this time of year. But you can see that flower is very unique, because it curls, and then it opens up, and the petals become erect, where the reproductive parts of the plant are facing down. Exposure here would be like part sun to shade. Again, if it gets morning sun, I think you're fine. Afternoon sun, and depending on the amount of shade it gets during the day, this time of year, I think you will be fine even in a full sun area. But the colors on this are really nice. A lot of lavenders, pinks, purples, reds, crimson, scarlets, whites. And the other thing I like about it is, even when it's not in bloom, the variegation on the foliage of these is really quite unique. It's got a silver color to it. Some of them are almost a white creamy color, and there are varieties out there that have more of a central white spot, not just along the edge, as I'm pointing to here on this image on the right side. So, that color, not only with the unique flowers, but also with the foliage, is something that will draw your eye to it. And the other thing that's unique is a lot of these varieties now, or there's new varieties out here, where the edges of these petals are ruffled and bicolor. So there's a lot of interesting textures and colors that you can bring to the landscape or to containers when using cyclamen. Dianthus or carnation has been around for a while, and it's a great cool season plant. There are short varieties as Dianthus chinensis, which we see down here with these single petals, is more low growing. So you're probably going to have this in the front or mid area of the bed. And then we have some of the taller varieties that we can use as cut flower. So again, something value added. You can enjoy it indoors, and you can also bring it. You can enjoy it outdoors, and you can also bring it indoors, which is also a plus. These plants will prefer full sun, but if they're in the shade, they will do just as well. Flower production might be a little less, but overall, these plants are going to thrive. There's been a lot of breeding on these now. And so there's some hybrids out there that are interspecific, two different species. They're both dianthus, but their species are different. And they've bred in some heat tolerance. So some of these varieties now will bloom not only in the cool season, but will continue blooming through the heat of the summer, which is really nice. This one up here, Jolt, is one of the series or varieties that if you can get a hold of it, you'll see it in the spring. It blooms throughout the summer and then will continue blooming through the cool season. So it's a really nice plant, upright, very thick stems. It's got Dianthus barbatus in it, which is Sweet William, which even has a better fragrance to it. So Dianthus are quite versatile and do an excellent job for your cool season garden. Pansies, probably the #1 plant for cool season gardens. These will top out at about 8 inches in height and plant growth, and that flower can get probably about 3, maybe 3.5 inches across. So it's a large flower, as you can see, whether you're using it in containers or planting in mass and drifts here. One of the great things about it is the color range on these guys. You can see we've got those with the dark face. We can have clear, what they call cool colors. They're varieties that they've got streaks in them which they refer to as cat whiskers. And if you're whatever football team that you like, that color is probably available in a pansy. So if you want to do it up in maroon for the Aggies or whatever color you went to school with or high school, that pansy color is probably out there, and it works extremely well. The one interesting thing is, again, as the breeders develop these varieties, everybody's aware of the wave petunia, but now there's the cool wave, and it's a trailing or spreading pansy. So if you like that look, if you've got a larger area and maybe you don't want to plant as many plants, these trailing ones will work extremely well. The other thing is they work great in hanging baskets, or you can use them as your spiller in a combination. So the cool waves are the ones that have that trailing spreading habit. The osteospermum, African daisy, you'll probably start to see these in the market after the first of the year. And they've got that typical daisy look. You can see the one on the right here with the white petals, the dark eye, very nice contrast. Here you can see drifts of the yellow ones. They come in golden colors. There are some that have a mauve, a dusty look. So this is a great plant, whether in containers or in the landscape, about 10 to 14 inches tall. So probably midsection of that bed is where you want to use it. It's going to prefer, as much sun as you can give it for this time of year. So put it in a sunny spot. But this is one that just, the other thing I like is the way it blooms over the entire canopy of the plant. It's not just on the outside, but you've got flowers over the entire plant, which is what you want. You want a good, strong flower production from that plant. So Osteospermum African daisy is one that if you haven't grown it before, you might want to consider it. Snapdragon, another one, tried and true, along with pansies. This will allow you to, again, there's some diversity here. We've got dwarf varieties that we can use in the midsection of the bed, and then we've got the taller varieties that we can use as cut flowers or give some height and structure to that bed. You're going to want these in full sun as much as possible. Again, another cut flower, so we can enjoy outdoors, we can enjoy it indoors. And you know, the color ranges, we've got reds, we've got yellows, we've got pinks, we've got whites. So just depending the smaller varieties, shorter varieties, the flower heads aren't going to be as long or as tall on them, as opposed to the cut flower varieties or the taller ones, where you're going to get a much longer head, which is going to give you more color pow for your dollar than it does with the smaller ones. But depending on where you want to use it in the bed, you've got that choice of towards the back or somewhere in mid bed. And then the cousin for the pansy, the viola. This is one that you know, my thought is it's smaller it's a smaller flower than the pansy, but I think it produces more. So I feel it's much more prolific, and it's got some really nice bicolors, and then very clean single colors or monotones. They produce extremely well. We did some down in our gardens this past season with the master gardeners, and they did extremely well. So again, even when we get a frost on these plants will continue to go. They won't miss a step, and they will perform extremely well. So again, this is smaller in the way of height, so about 6 to 8 inches. So, you know, in the front of the bed, it might be a filler or even a type of spiller in a combination planter.
Paul,
Now,
excuse me, but
sure.
I just want to interrupt and say, if you're watching this and have some questions about some of these plants as Paul's going through, go ahead and put them in chat, and he'll have opportunities to answer some of those as we go. Thanks, Paul.
No problem. Thanks, Skip. The next one up is ornamental cabbage and kale. So this is one we're not growing for the flowers. We want to add, if you want to add texture, if you want to add some unique colors, if you want to add a little bit of depth to that bed or to that combination. So you can see the different types that are out there. This is more of the similar to the head type or the type. But you can see we've got, you know, purple to lavender centers. It's almost like a silvery type edge to it. We've got white centers. We've got white veination against the green. So you can bring a very unique look to your beds or to your combinations. And as you can see in this container here, it almost has a cloud-like effect. I mean, these are just two varieties of kale, and that texture and that depth that it brings is really rather interesting. So it's something. It's not always about the flowers. It can be about the texture and the color and the of the foliage as you work it into the landscape. Calendula is one. Its common name is the English marigold. And it is one that, you know, don't get it confused with the typical marigold. They're two different species. But this is one that really has come on lately. And I really like it because it's got a nice large flower, and these single petals just sort of open in waves. You can see the younger ones here, and you can see the petal number that is that will end up opening here over time. And as the flower gets larger, that color just really jumps out at you. You're looking here in color ranges more in the oranges and the yellows, about 8 to 10 inches tall. So probably mid bed here for these. Diversified with sun to part shade. And then we've got singles and double types. So it's one that is coming out more. We're starting to see it more often in the landscape. We're starting to see it more often in the garden centers. I remember when I was in the industry, the growers didn't like it because it was what they called a white fly magnet. They had problems keeping the white flies off of it. And I think through breeding, it may not be as appetizing to the white flies now. And I think the overall plant presentation is much better on these. So this is another one where if you haven't tried it, calendula, give it a shot, because I think you'll be surprised with how well it will perform for you. And then we've got petunias. So behind the pansies and violas, petunias perform extremely well. Again, a lot of options. So when we talk about grandiflora types, we're talking about the size of the flower. So it's the larger flower type, about 10 to 15 inches in height. And then we come down to the multiflora, which is a little bit smaller. And honestly, unless you're out there with a ruler, you're probably not going to be able to tell the difference between a grandiflora and a multiflora. Now, there are some petunia varieties out there that have much smaller flower types, and what they call minis, which are probably in the 3 to 5 inch range, which are a little bit smaller. And then we have the spreading type, so the wave petunias. And there's variations within the wave petunias now where we can have more compact varieties that are only maybe 12 to 18 inches wide. And then we can have the tidal waves, which can get 30 to 40 inches wide and about 3 feet tall. So depending on the area, again, lots of colors, lots of growth habits, lots of forms. They're going to want to perform, they'll perform best in full sun. You'll get the most flower power out of them. And these will bloom, at least for us up here, through April, maybe into May. But then they start to get a little ratty looking for us. And honestly, you get tired of looking at them, and you want to get them out of the bed and put something fresh and something new in. But you can see the nice habit on these, and this is what you want to see: flower production over the entire plant. So a great cool season plant. Again, it's a staple in there with snapdragons, pansies, and violas. Petunia is another one that you can't go wrong with it.
Paul, should we take a few
Sure.
questions?
Sure.
People really responded and are lining up.
They're lining up. Let's go for it.
Okay, well, one person asked about a good brand of a liquid fertilizer that you recommend. So do you want to just comment in general on liquid fertilizers? And
yeah, what I use Miracle-Gro, and I've never had any issues with it. The plants respond well to it. It's a good quick feed. Again, you don't want to, whenever you're putting a liquid fertilizer out, you don't want to put it out if the soil is dry. You want to have some moisture in there. So you want, some moisture in that soil, and then give it a good drench with the liquid fertilizer, and you should be good to go.
Okay. Any ideas on where someone might be able to find wave petunias?
You should start to see them in the garden centers here. If they're not already out, probably after the first of the year is when you'll start to see them. And I've seen them in both the retail independents, and I've also seen them in the box stores. So I think they should be pretty readily available here pretty soon.
Can you repeat the variety of Dianthus that's more heat tolerant?
It is the Jolt series, Jolt, and it will have very thick stems on it when it goes into bloom.
I think you mentioned some things about hardiness, but someone wants to know, other than pansies and violas, what are maybe the most freeze hardy of your cool seasons?
Well, all of these are going to hold up quite well. They may get a little bit of burn. The kales and the ornamental kales and cabbages will hold up extremely well also because they have that nice thicker foliage to them. So I would say they're probably the top three that are probably the strongest. And the petunias will hold up quite well also.
Okay. Last question for now. One person had some calendulas that got really tall. Do you recommend pinching them?
Absolutely. And that's one where, if they got really tall, cut them as a cut flower. Once they are done blooming, go ahead and deadhead it. But you can, and when we talk, if you're not aware, when you talk about pinching is if you take out that growing point or you break off, that shoot continues to grow, and that's where we call that growing point or the apical dominance. You break that out, it affects the hormones and the buds, the lateral buds that are growing along that stem will then start to elongate and grow and what we call break. And so you'll have more shoots, which will lead to more potential spots for flowers to develop.
Okay, one last question. Someone asked about which ones of these can you still start from seed? Any general comments about maybe starting? Some of these may be a bit of a challenge to start from seed at any time.
Correct. I mean, you can do petunias from seed. You can do pansies from seed. You just gotta remember if you start now, you're looking maybe 3 weeks, 4 weeks in that what we call the plug stage, and then transplant, and another 3 weeks or 4 weeks to get up to a larger transplant. So, one of the things you always want to do is when you're scheduling or trying to figure out is what's the date that you want to put that plant in the ground and then work backwards. So if I know I need 3 to 4 weeks for it to grow to fill out to a large enough plant that I can transplant it, and I know I need another 3 to 4 weeks from the time I sow it until I can transplant it into that 3-inch pot. Then you got to give yourself maybe 7 to 8 weeks prior to when it's going to go in the ground. So you always want to work backwards when you schedule in order to hit that window. And that's what greenhouse growers do. They have their sales windows. And so they know they want to have these plants available for a 3 to 4 week window. They're counting backwards and they're staggering their plantings in order to keep product flowing for that stage. All right.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So stock, Mathiola, a great, another one that's going to add some height, some depth to the landscape, but it's got great fragrance. Stock is used a lot in the florist industry as a cut flower. Very sturdy stems, a very good color range. And the other thing, when I started doing new products way back, we would see a lot of issues with the flowers where the genetics wasn't consistent, and we would see spikes with single flowers. You can see in this image, everything is showing nice, full, double flower type flower heads. And it's like anything else. Over time, the breeders can make the proper selections, find out which parents result in greater percentage of these doubles. And so you could see the nice uniform consistency of this flower production. But the fragrance, if you walk into a greenhouse and they're growing stock, you will know you are in a greenhouse with stock because it's got a very good flowery fragrance. Not overpowering, but just a really pleasant fragrance that is a definite plus that this plant brings, whether in the garden or as a cut flower in the house. Again, another foliage type plant that can add texture and color. Dusty Miller works extremely well. Senecio. So this will get about 10 to 12 inches. So this is something that you can fill in, in spots in the mid border for a splash of different color or texture. Does well in the sun or shade, but it's got that nice velvety foliage, that nice look to it. So it's something that, you know, along with the ornamental kales and cabbages, gives a different look, a different texture, and can provide some contrast to the bed or the combination planter. Diacia is one that I really like, and it's starting to come around more often. It does extremely well in containers. You can see the flower power on this. You know, it's not a super large plant. It's more of a spreader. There are varieties out there that are cascading types, but it has that nice, you know, it'll come to the edge of the pot and you know, sort of just peek over, and that flower production is just nonstop. So I like this personally. I like it better in containers, but I have seen it in the landscape and it does well. Um, and it's something that, you know, in the front of the bed or in the mid as a filler, um, you can have a very unique splash of color from Diacia. Again, we think of these as a spring or summer, but really, you know, we saw a lot of these in the garden centers, you know, right around Halloween for, you know, the Day of the Dead, for Dia de los Muertos. So we've got variety in the height, whether uh, the erectas are the taller varieties, which with the much fuller heads, and then we have the French marigolds, the Tagetes petula, which are the lower growing and the smaller flower ones. So these can add, you know, some of that fall color uh, to the landscape. One of the things I always look for, especially with the Tagetes erecta, you want the varieties that have the tighter flower heads. Um, we had a breeder come down when we were doing some evaluations for them growing in our heat and humidity down here. And he was walking through, and the main thing he was looking for, he was squeezing the top of these heads. The tighter the head, the better it's going to hold up to rain. And you can see the difference in the varieties that have the tight flower heads. The water just rolls off of it. And so the water won't sit. If the water sits in there and gets down in there, then you're going to have disease problems, and that flower is going to look, you know, pretty bad, pretty poor. The ones that have the tighter heads, that water just, you know, like water off a duck's back, it rolls right off. And so you're going to have a much cleaner, better looking plant. And you know, we get rains, you know, this time of year or in the spring, in the summer. And so tighter the head, the better it's going to hold up under our rainy conditions. But they've got a very long blooming window, and they just have a nice color and height on the taller varieties to bring into that landscape. Nemesia, if you want fragrance, this is a great plant. I love Nemesia. In the landscape, about 12 to 14 inches tall. It's going to be taller than it is wide. You can use this in the landscape. I really like it in containers. You know, if you have it on the patio, on some of those mornings where you're having your coffee, it's warm enough to go out, you'll enjoy that fragrance. Or if you have it in planters on the as you come in, you know, by your front door or by the patio door, as you pass it, you'll get that fragrance. So it's really nice. This plant plays well with others. It's not an aggressive grower. It stays where it's supposed to, but once it starts to bloom, it is just a nonstop bloomer, and it brings that fragrance with it. Primulas, this is another one, you know, similar to the cyclamen that, you know, is usually a gift type plant, but we can use it as a landscape plant down here. Something that you want to probably use in clusters, maybe use in containers, but you can see that nice, you know, presentation of the flowers. The flower heads, the spikes sit above the foliage. That foliage is very thick. Almost like a leathery type, cardboard type, thick foliage. And then these bicolored flowers just really, set off a nice contrast. So it adds a little different look. It's something that we're not used to seeing normally, but through the cool seasons, these plants will continue to bloom and bring a nice, unique look into that landscape. Again, another one that works extremely well as a filler if you're using it in containers. Ranunculus, this is one that you'll probably see after the first of the year that will be available. And if you like peonies, we can't grow peonies down here, but if you want that peony type look with the flowers, ranunculus would fit the bill. You can also use it as a cut flower. So this is one where it's going to be taller, about 14 inches tall. There are varieties out there that are shorter, more compact. But to me, to really get that the look and the wow factor, I like the tall varieties and the size of the flowers and just the petal count on these is a really attractive look, not only in the landscape but as a cut flower. Now, Calibrachoa has that look of a petunia, but the thing that's unique about Calibrachoa is the color combinations. It's a different genus altogether as opposed to petunia, and it's got these very unique bicolors, and the color intensities on these are really extreme. The size of that flower is probably it's gotten larger, probably about the size of a silver dollar. If you remember what a silver dollar, the size of a silver dollar looks like, but and it will just bloom over the entire plant. So this is one you can use it in the landscape, but this is why I like it more in a combination planter or as a container plant by itself. Very good flower production and just those unique color combinations, the bicolors that it has. So there's varieties out there that the have an iridescent color to them. When they are in the full sun, it looks like they're almost got a sparkle or a glaze to them. So really nice presentation, and one that you'll see a lot in hanging baskets when they come to the market. Bacopa is another one that's sort of that filler and that spiller. Again, I like this more as a combination planter. As it the early varieties, probably that flower was probably about the size of a penny. Now we're seeing flowers about the size of a quarter. So the size, the flower size has improved, and the production continues to be, it's very floriferous. So it's one plant that works extremely well as an accent plant. So that's why I like it more in planters and combinations, maybe than using it in the landscape. You're going to see lavenders, blues, whites, and pinks. So sort of what you're seeing here is the color range that you would see for Bacopa. Erysimum, wallflower. This is another one that if you haven't tried it, you might want to consider it. It's a taller flower. It has a scent to it, so fragrance again. So something, another value-added item. And it adds height and depth. So you're always looking for, how can you draw the eye to either that container or to the landscape, and how, you don't want everything at one height. You want it to sort of flow, and you want your eye to follow it. So this is a yellowish or golden variety, but there are other colors out there, and it's one that the growers are starting to produce more of. Because the breeding and the genetics has improved. So, and there are perennial varieties of Erysimum out there that are different species, but they perform extremely well down here also. Linaria is one, again, this is one that has unique flower clusters. You can see quite a few bicolors in there. It's got a nice flower spike, and it's sort of got a wispy growth habit to it. So it, it's not heavy on the foliage. It's one that I like to see, sort of pop up within the landscape or within the container, sort of the way Gumfrina is. Gumfrina will just sort of pop up and work its way through the landscape or through the bed. And that's sort of what Linaria will do. They do have a light fragrance, and the flower spikes get large enough that you can probably cut these, put them in a vase, and enjoy them in the house. And I think this is our last one, verbena. And verbena is another one where it's more of a spreader, but you've got more upright varieties. Great bicolor combinations in the flowers. You can see some sort of like a burgundy, a white, a red and white with a white eye, and then we have cool colors, single colors. We see spreading varieties. We see more upright. And the other thing we're starting to see is these are getting much better resistance to powdery mildew, which was always an issue with verbena. And we're starting to see these, probably after the first of the year, you'll see these in January or so making it to the market. And they're going a little bit further. They're starting to grow a little bit further into the, the heat of the summer. There was one in the neighborhood. I never found out what variety she had, but it bloomed all summer, and she planted it early, and she would clean it up, deadhead it, and it had great flower production even through the heat of the summer. So keep an eye out for verbena. Low grower, probably mid to low grower, can work as a spiller in combinations, but really good color combinations within those flowers. So with that, Skip, if we've got any more questions, I am open to answering and helping anybody out as best as I can. I do want to thank you for joining us, though.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul. We do have some questions. Someone asked about deer resistance. I know you've covered a lot of different kinds of flowers, but any comments on that?
Good question, and off the top of my head, I don't know. I would have to do some digging on that and do a little bit extra research. I guess the good thing is you've got a list of plants that you can start with, and then you can dig a little bit further on deer resistance with regard to the plants that we just went over. But off the top of my head, I am not. I wouldn't know one way or another which ones are or which ones aren't.
Okay. I did post a resource on dealing with deer in the landscape that's in the chat. If anyone wants to check that out, it's kind of more of a general dealing with deer than a plant this and they won't eat it. I found that they eat everything, especially if I say they won't eat it, they'll start eating it that night. Okay. So another question came in, Paul. Do most of these die out after spring?
Yeah, what you will start to see is as our heat and especially as the humidity starts to rise, they will not look good. They won't like it. And the prime example, the very first plant I talked about, the alyssum, it will go south pretty quickly once the heat and humidity kicks in. But I don't know if you saw. I think I did one of my first talks. Now that we're 5 months, 6 months into this, there's a plant called lobularia that looks just like alyssum. It's its cousin, but it holds up in the heat, and so you can swap out alyssum and come in with lobularia. But yeah, the petunias, you'll start to see them. The flower production will decline. The foliage won't look good. So the plant will let you know when it's time to get them out of there and come in with your spring summer planting.
All right. Well, you've got a lot of fans out there. People really enjoyed the presentation.
Great.
Michael asks about any recommendations for slow release fertilizer and soil preparation.
Well, I would recommend for soil preparation, if you go to Aggie Horticulture and then you go to the Earth Kind, they've got a very good fact sheet on bed preparation. And normally when we do Earth Kind trials, we do pull a soil sample so we know what we're starting with, nutrient-wise and pH-wise. But we amend the bed with a 3-inch layer of compost. We till that in, and then we plant directly into that. On the earth kind side, we don't put any additional fertilizers in because the compost, as it breaks down, helps improve that charge. I've always used Osmocote, and it works extremely well, but there's a lot of decent ones out there. Nelson's, what's it, Color Star, I believe, works extremely well. So it's and if you want to send me an email, if you have any more specific questions, let me go page up here. There's my email address. You can always send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to give you a little bit more information if you have a specific question on the type of fertilizer.
Paul, someone asked about the Osmocotes, since there are different numbers and different versions. Any thoughts on that?
Right. So what you'll see is a 6-month, a 9-month. I don't know if they have a 12-month yet. They might. And so that's where it all comes into play with regard to moisture, temperature, the humidity. So what we find down here is if you put a 9-month out, and this was because we used Osmocote in our cans or in our pots for nursery production. If we incorporated a 9-month, we probably got at least 6 months out of it. Now this is growing, in nursery production. In the landscape, it's probably not going to be quite the full 9 months, but it will get you through most of that growing season, and you're not going to see a drop off in production. So the way that occurs is they look like prills. They look like BBs, but they're what we call prills. And the outer coat, depending on the size of the prill, is a different thickness. So they break down at different rates. And so over the course of that 6 to 9 month period or 12-month period, it releases into the soil. And that's how you get a nice, even application and release to the plant.
All right. I think that's all the questions I've seen so far. So I just want to remind everybody that we have some programs coming up. I just put a link into chat where you can go view all of our past presentations. If you want to see some of the other ones Paul has made that he mentioned, you can go back and watch those. For those of you who are having trouble, a few people were having trouble getting audio but not video, you can go back and watch this one, and therefore you'll get the slides and be able to see everything at that website. Coming up next week, Boone Holiday. Boone is horticulturist in Fort Bend County. We'll be talking about winter bulb care and division. Boone is an excellent expert on bulbs and caring for bulbs and growing bulbs and producing bulbs, the best ones for the area. And so you'll definitely want to see that. And then the following week, December 16th, is our last presentation of the year, and that will be by Stephen Brugerhoff, horticulturist in Brazoria County, on horticulture myths and mystics. And I'm not going to miss that one. That's a fun topic, and I'm kind of curious what kind of mystics we're going to learn about. We've been kidding Stephen about that a little bit. So you definitely want to see that one. If you ever go on Pinterest and look at horticultural stuff, don't do that until you listen to Stephen first, because I think Pinterest is probably the horticulture myth capital of the world. Well, if there aren't any questions, give Paul a great hand, and thank you guys so much for tuning in, and please join us for our next two. By the way, we're going to continue this next year. So if you have friends and family they want to join in, we'll be starting up in January, probably going to an every other week schedule next year. But you make sure and add that to your calendar. Thanks a lot, folks.